Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Sonic the Hedgehog, the movie, or the Sonic OVA. Now, this is the winner of my very first movie review vote, voted on by you, the viewers, from a selection of movies selected by people in my Patreon. If you would like to pledge to my Patreon, check out the link below, and maybe the movie that you choose will be voted for me to review next month. And this movie was, of course, obviously and infamously chosen by Nolan, who you probably all know. To be clear, technically, I guess I am talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, the movie, although they are sort of the same thing. Sonic OVA, I guess, refers to the Japanese version, and I'm reviewing the American dub of it, just to be clear on that. I'll just call it the Sonic OVA, though, but we know what I'm talking about. The Sonic OVA was released in Japan in 1996, which is usually a straight-to-video animated thing. It seems to have been a pilot, pretty much, for a failed Sonic, more anime cartoon that never got off the ground, and then was released in home video in America as Sonic the Hedgehog, the movie, and dubbed in English. I am not a huge Sonic fan. I played it a lot in the 90s, the first two games, and the third one, and I always liked the character, and I liked the cartoons a lot of the 90s. They had actually two running at the same time, one on Saturday mornings, and then one that was syndicated. And I know the syndicated one has gone on to be fairly influential, particularly with people who work at Cartoon Network currently. I'd never seen this before, and I kind of semi-get why the fans are so into it, and I also get why it can't go beyond kind of a fan thing, and that's kind of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, or the Sonic OVA in a nutshell, almost. The animation is wonderful in certain places. In some places you're like, man, if only this was a show, if only this had become something other than just these two episodes, but this is unfortunately all we got. And so the Sonic the Hedgehog movie is kind of almost like you wish there was more of it. It's semi-accurate according to some people, but then other people it's not, which is confusing. But I think it is kind of like one of those cartoons where I appreciate the animation, I get what it's trying to do, but it kind of fails in a lot of the way that most video game adaptations really do, and it just ends up being just a pilot with a lot of potential, and it never got to fully develop and really take advantage of that potential. It's two episodes. One is called Welcome to Eggman Land, and the other is Sonic versus Mega Sonic. The first one kind of sets everything up, and Sonic is hanging out on this island, which semi reminded me of Porco Rosso, just because he was on an island in a chair and there was a plane there, so put two things together that made no sense. And then he meets up with Robotnik, and they realize they have to go on this crazy adventure to this other underneath place because they're in Skyland, and they have to go to a dark place underneath. And then Tails and Sonic meet up with Knuckles, who has a hat because they like hats, I guess, and then has to fight exact clone of himself, Mega Sonic, who's kind of a robot Sonic, and hopefully defeat Robotnik once again. This was dubbed by AD Vision in America, and I really didn't like the voices in this, and that's one of the initial problems, is when he starts talking, you're like, that's not Sonic, that's not Jaleel White, and initially there's like that divide. And Tails, I think anyone, even if they like the voice acting, seems to agree that Tails' voice is like one of the worst Tails voices ever in the history of the universe. I don't particularly like any of the voices in this, but I think one of the biggest problems with this pilot is, and the problem with video game adaptations in general, is that it kind of takes for granted that you already know Sonic. And yes, of course we do, and I get that, but you kind of need to set Sonic up for us as an audience. You have to assume that people who might be seeing this won't necessarily play Sonic games. So that's kind of been the problem with a lot of video game adaptations. They kind of take for granted that they have this built-in audience, and hey, that's probably true, but in a pure storytelling angle, you can't really do that. Comic book movies don't do that. No really movies do that. They try to make sure you're introduced to the character, that there's some world building organically, and then this has none of that really. It takes advantage of the fact that you know Sonic. Everything you learn about the world is in like a presentation by Dr. Robotnik. They don't do it in a way that's like kind of softens the blow, so you're not like really noticing what they're doing or their failings at storytelling. And the problem with this is there's not a point where they set up Sonic. You get to meet him as a personality. You get this weird thing on a beach and Tails is acting stupid, and then they're on a plane, and then they meet Robotnik, and you're like, where's the part where the audience is invited in? And that's not really in this, and I think that's probably why maybe this didn't become anything, or why it's just for fans. And the problem with a lot of video game stuff is you have to take into account like someone like myself, or someone who doesn't really play video games as much, although I guess I am familiar with Sonic. But if you're not familiar with Sonic, you're like, what the fuck is this? What's going on? Who's that? What's this? And it might be cool to see some of these things and like certainly when he's running, I thought the animation in that was kind of neat. If you're not a fan of it, you're not going to get anything other than that. So I can kind of understand why this video was primarily sold in video game shops, because there's no other audience really for it. I don't really like companion piece kind of movies necessarily, but I understand them to a certain degree. Although this thing has had, you know, apparently it's like unavailable or rare or something, although now it's on YouTube, or at least the Sonic the Hedgehog the movie version is, and various places online. I grew up with watching a pilot that never went anywhere, and it was called Pride of the X-Men, and I watched it a lot. So I actually really understand rewatching this constantly. And I kind of understand thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool if this Sonic the Hedgehog OVA had become a series? The animation's so cool, and seeing things, I guess, you probably hadn't seen before and stuff. Pride of the X-Men, much like the Sonic OVA, has a lot of potential. It'd be cool if this series had existed, which it didn't. And much like Pride of the X-Men, I like the Fox Kids X-Men show. I think the animation isn't as good as Pride of the X-Men, but the stories are a lot better. I don't really know much about Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon shows other than the two I watched in the 90s, but I kind of look at this as kind of a similar thing to Pride of the X-Men, where, I mean, it's fun to watch. I get it if you're a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog, because it has really great animation quality to it. There's probably a lot of stuff you get that I didn't get. It seems to be like most people look on it fondly, but as time's gone on, it hasn't aged well. But like Pride of the X-Men, it was never actually that good. It's just when most people were watching it, they were kids or like really loved Sonic the Hedgehog so much they just wanted it to be good. And I think there probably is a subcategory of pilots of things that were made off of previous properties that never went anywhere, but then have a cult following. Pride of the X-Men got its own video game, believe it or not. That arcade game is based on Pride of the X-Men, the amazing X-Men arcade game. There can be cool things that come from it, but this on its own is like a fan-only thing, and I think it will only exist to be a fan-only thing because it can't move on from there. If I was making a Sonic the Hedgehog movie, I would look at this and go, there can be really amazing sequences of Sonic running, but we need to understand how to get this character to work as an audience. Deadpool, for example, I know there's like the Deadpool Sonic connection, but like Deadpool, for example, is a movie like the Marvel Studios movies that are character first and then plot almost second. In terms of an audience, the main thing you're remembering of Deadpool is Deadpool. The main thing you remember of Iron Man is Iron Man. And I know I bring up Marvel Studios a lot. The reason I do, beyond like being a fan of them and liking comics and stuff, is that they introduce you to the character. They almost care more about it. You watch the new Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 trailer that just came out at the time I made this review or shot this review. It is more about the character than anything else. I don't know what that movie's about. I don't really know who the villain is. I guess I could look that up, but you don't get that from the trailer. And that's why those movies have been so successful. That's why like Force Awakens is bigger than Rogue One, because it's more about character. It's having a fun time with the character. I think Sonic the Hedgehog has that within him as a cartoon character. I think he could be like that. He could be like a Bugs Bunny. He could be like one of those. Not exactly that kind of a thing where you have a real connection with him as an audience. I don't think the Sonic OVA really does that at all. It just cares more about this weird plot adventure in this post-apocalyptic world that Sonic lives in or something, and all this nonsense. They shouldn't have done that. Really what the first episode should have been is them just hang out in some like rudimentary little adventure and you meet Sonic. You can even see him do fan service stuff. It really doesn't matter. You just need to be brought over to his side. And the thing that I think a lot of video game movies and shows have a problem with is bringing someone in the audience over who isn't a fan of the games, isn't playing them, and get them into it. And this is something that continually seems to happen from Warcraft and other stuff, and the Sonic OVA kind of does it again. I think it's more of an extreme example because you probably wouldn't have seen it unless you bought it at a video game shop or you were super interested in Sonic, so that already holds people back. But then when you actually watch it, it's really not for anyone else, and it doesn't even claim to be. So I think if you are a Sonic fan, if you're a video game fan, I don't think it's a bad watch. I think it's actually kind of fun and entertaining. I had a decent enough time because I knew the character, even if I didn't like the voice acting much. But I kind of wouldn't mind if there were more episodes of this had it actually become a series, but instead it's just kind of like these 2 episodes only released directly to video, which doesn't say much, particularly at the time, for their faith in it, I guess, after they had made it, but especially considering what video on demand was in the late 90s. But you probably shouldn't be watching this unless you refer to him as the Blue Blur or something like that. For anyone else, this is probably not something they will even ever hear about, and there's probably a reason for it. But if you're a fan of Sonic or fan of Sega or something like that, I think it's a nice way to kill an hour and then just kind of move on from that and hope they make a much better Sonic movie eventually. So if you have seen Sonic the Hedgehog the movie or Sonic OVA, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And if you would like to select a movie for the next movie review vote, then click on the link below and be a supporter of my Patreon and pledge, and then maybe the movie that you pick will be the winner next month. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.